Welcome to Building a Data Culture in Your Office. This is going to be the first of 3 data workshops that we're going to bring you this summer to explore the ways that election officials can best use data throughout this election and beyond. I hope that as you watch at home or in your office that you follow along with us and engage with us online using the hashtag BeReady16. This election data workshop is a collaboration between many organizations, including Democracy Works, the National Conference of State Legislatures, Center for Technology and Civic Life, with generous support from the Democracy Fund and hosted by the Election Assistance Commission. I'm Tiana Epps-Johnson, the founder and executive director of the Center for Technology and Civic Life, and I am joined here today with Monica Crane-Childers, the Director of Government Services for Democracy Works, Kurt Sampsel, the Government Services Associate at the Center for Technology and Civic Life, and Whitney May, the Director of Government Services at the Center for Technology and Civic Life. This is, as I mentioned, the first of 3 data workshops. In this first session, we're going to dig into the importance of building a data culture in your office. We're then going to transition in our next workshop to talk about how election officials can best visualize data to tell a compelling story. And then in our third workshop, we're going to talk about how election officials can use data to persuade decision makers. Before we dive into any of those things, let's talk about something really fundamental. Why do we care about data? One of the big reasons that we care about data and wanted to bring these workshops to election officials is because data really allows us to gain knowledge about the ways that elections are run and answer questions about how election offices compare to others and can improve performance. Election data also allows you to better communicate in a really transparent way with the public. And finally, as we'll cover in our third webinar, data can be a really effective method to be able to persuade decision makers about different things that your office needs or ways that you might want to change your operations. So for this webinar, we have 4 clear objectives. After this session, you will develop a basis for analyzing data. You will acquire starting points for how to use data to deal with an issue. You'll also gain familiarity with data sources and guidelines. And finally, you'll observe examples of how other election officials have created a data culture in their own offices. So to kick us off, I'm going to turn it over to Monica, who's going to help us begin to explore some questions like how you can answer questions like how you compare to other jurisdictions, what is normal when it comes to different types of data, and what you can change based on the types of insights you glean from your data.
Thanks, Tiana. So one of the main reasons to look at the data in your office is to figure out what's going on, what's ordinary in your office, what's normal. We call this establishing a baseline. It's really hard to be able to identify things that are out of the ordinary if you don't know what is ordinary. And so you want to look at your data over time, be familiar with what it looks like normally so that you can identify anomalies. One of the best ways to do that is to compare and contrast yourself to other jurisdictions. So you want to find jurisdictions that are like you on a number of different categories, and that way you know how you're doing in comparison with other people. Whitney, would you like to tell us a little more about how you might identify those peer jurisdictions?
Yeah, so this is something we're going to actually explore more in depth in the second workshop, but just thinking about some ways that you can compare yourself to other jurisdictions to make sure that you're comparing sort of apples to apples is to look at population is a great way to recognize someone who might have the same resources as your office. Demographics is another area to look at. Process, right? Like if we're talking about all vote by mail, like state of Washington, Pacific Northwest, that's very different than what we see in a state like North Carolina. So making sure that you are comparing jurisdictions that have the same process as you as well.
That's great. You also want to look at your data to figure out what's working or what's not working. Now, we know that we usually don't get direct causation from the data sets that we have in elections. Sometimes you can do empirical tests that will show that, but most of the time, the best that you're going to get is a correlation, not a causation. But that doesn't mean that correlation isn't useful. Looking at which things correlate with which other things can often give you clues to what you might do to improve your process or your efficiency. Are there examples with uncounted mail ballots that you can tell me about, Whitney?
Yeah, so thinking about sort of the clues, like a hint perhaps. So looking at reasons that you have uncounted mail ballots. This is, again, something we'll dig into deeper later on, but imagine you have a lot of folks who are having their ballots rejected because there was a missing signature on the absentee envelope. You might consider, is there a way to make the instructions more clear so that you can reduce some of those mistakes? Another one is the missed deadline, right? We see this is probably the number one reason that you have rejected absentee ballots. So is a possible cure there to encourage people to mail in their ballots a little bit earlier? Just two examples.
Great. We also know that there are unexpected consequences in elections, and that's something we wanted to mention because although you can look at data and you can look at your baseline and see where your anomalies are, that's not going to predict everything that happens in every election cycle. For instance, we know that we saw in some states during the presidential primary cycle this year that there were long lines, and though we know a lot of the causes of long lines from past election cycles, it appears that there was a new one this cycle, or at least one that was bigger than it has been in the past, which is that voters voting in closed primary states didn't realize that they needed to be registered with a party to vote, and so there were a lot of voters in certain states that came out without that knowledge, and that caused longer lines. That's not necessarily something you could have caught by looking at prior presidential elections. So don't think that data is going to solve every problem for you, but that doesn't mean it can't give you some useful hints.
So after we take this knowledge and understanding and learning from data, Kurt, can you start to walk us through some of the benefits of sharing this information more broadly with the public in a way that establishes some transparency within the election office?
Of course. So it's worth talking about when we're using this word transparency. What do we mean and what does it have to offer? So we use transparency to mean that you're demonstrating the consistency of a process or an outcome. In effect, you're making it clear, you're making it obvious to the public and to stakeholders. What it can do for you is in the long run, it can save you time if it becomes a regular process instead of something that you only do after the fact or only do as damage control. So ideally, transparency is something that you have in place as a regular part of the work that you do. So here's an example that I want to show briefly from the state of Colorado that shows an example of how transparency can help you. In particular, it can help you when it's not simply damage control. It can help you create assurance with the work that you're doing. So for instance, this is data that came from the introduction of online voter registration in the state of Colorado. And what the data shows, if you look at it, is that the percentage or the proportion of registered voters with each party preference is effectively the same before and after the intervention of creating the online voter registration. So if there were any concerns among the public, stakeholders, or different organizations that would be something that could be problematic, all you need to do is look to the data and it suggests that there's really no problem there, and in fact the proportions are the same before and after the intervention.
Yeah. That actually, I think, transitions us really nicely into thinking about how we can go from using data in a way to be transparent to using data effectively for persuasion. So Whitney, can you kick us off with talking about how something like that Colorado visualization or other visualizations can be effective at that point of persuasion?
Right. So I think something that we all have in common, whether you're an election expert or not, is that we lead pretty busy lives. So a lot of times you're just so busy that you have to absorb information quickly. And so visualizations really help explain what can sometimes be a complicated idea simply and quickly. It also helps people who aren't election experts understand what you're talking about. So we feel like visualizing data is super important. But it isn't enough just to make a beautiful chart or graph. You have to make sure that what you're presenting is accessible to everyone in your audience. And so two really helpful tips in this area are making sure that you include a text description, so a long description of your visualization, and sort of those key takeaways. What are the relationships that you're drawing attention to in this visualization, and writing that in a long text description. And also whatever that original data set is it a CSV or an Excel spreadsheet or something else, making sure that that is publicly available as well so other people can explore it.
Great. So We've talked about data so far kind of conceptually. I think it would be really helpful if we could break it down into some more concrete understanding around data. So Monica, can you kick us off and talk about data sources? Like, where are we getting this information in the first place to be able to gain any of this knowledge, or to be transparent with it, or to visualize it?
Right. So there's a lot of data that election offices already have at their disposal. It's already collected by the systems and processes that are already using, which is great. That means that you don't really have to do any extra work to make use of this data. One of the first places you can find it is in your election management and voter registration systems. These systems, by nature, have to collect this data in order to do the work that they do, and there are often a number of exports that you can pull out of these systems to get very consistent data over time. So that's the first place to look. The second place you might want to look is the Election Administration and Voting Survey conducted by the EAC, also known as EVES. EVES data is collected for every federal election cycle by the EAC, and it's compiled and compared and put out in sometimes very nice graphics that you can go and look at. But the nice thing about this is this data is nationwide, so particularly when you're looking at finding peer jurisdictions that are like you, that because there's data nationwide, you actually have a much wider swath to draw from in finding data about similar jurisdictions.
And the EVE survey has some of those different comparisons that Whitney pulled out, like being able to look at demographics or
Exactly.
budget size or jurisdictions.
Right, so that's a particularly great resource for finding those peer jurisdictions. It's right there and easy for you to do. The last one is something that some offices are using and some offices are not using, and that's web analytics. The best thing web analytics can be used for is finding out where voters are looking on your website, on your existing website. Now, some websites have analytics already configured. Some of them you need to configure Google Analytics for it, but Google Analytics is free, and it's a great way to go and get an idea of what are voters searching for, what pages are most popular on your site, and those can help you drive the resources that you put out for your voters because you can sort of see what questions they're interested in asking.
So I'm going to talk about two examples of different sources of data. Monica's given examples of sources that you may already have or may already have in place, may already be using. But I want to talk about two additional ones. And these in particular are good ways of getting qualitative data and getting a little bit deeper into people's reasons and motivations and the causes behind some of the numbers that you might be pulling up. So for one is a community survey. Here's an example from the city of Chicago. There's a question with regard to the use of public space. So there's a prompt here, what would you like to see more of in Chicago streets? And you can vote by calling or texting the phone number with the thing that you'd like to see more of. So this is an example of how you can do a community survey. Some pros and cons are worth noting with all of these because each source has some biases, it has some things that it reveals really well, and some things that it doesn't reveal so well. So let's talk about pros and cons with regard to community surveys. With pros, a large number of people can give their feedback. That's one nice thing about the community survey is participation is almost unlimited. It's also potentially low cost. It's something that doesn't necessarily require a lot of money. In addition, people can respond at their convenience. You don't need to have people all in the same room, all at the same time, participating in the survey. People can use it in their spare time. It can accommodate their schedules. Some cons with the community survey are sometimes it can have a low return rate. People need to be incentivized in some way to participate. And if people aren't interested or don't have an incentive, they may not be interested in participating. There's also, I think, a limited amount of expression in terms of what people can provide with regard to the example from the CTA, with regard to the use of public space. There are only 5 options. So it's great that people can select from the 5, but that really is only the things that they can select from. And in addition, because people self-select typically in a community survey, the group of people who participate may not necessarily be representative of the entire population whose perspectives you're interested in. So there may be additional perspectives that aren't being reflected in the survey. Another thing that I want to talk about as a potential source that you may want to explore to find data is a focus group. So focus groups are especially useful in a handful of situations. One example is if you're introducing a new program or a new system. You can get people's perspectives on it before you introduce it or right upon its introduction, which is nice. Focus groups are really useful for going beyond that sort of choice between 5 things. Because in a focus group, you can actually have a discussion with participants and you can sort of go far deeper beyond just options to get what people's perspectives and what people's beliefs are about the things that you're asking about. Some cons with regard to focus groups are, to really do it well, you need to have a facilitator. This means having an expert in the room to do the facilitation of the focus group. This can be costly. And it's also potentially time consuming, because the whole point of this, of course, is to get really deep information, really deep data from people. To do that, you don't want to rush.
With all of these data sets, as we're wanting to glean those insights, it looks like it could get a little unwieldy. So, Monica, can you just talk about some basic organizational principles about how we might be able to keep track of all of this information?
Yeah, I think one of the easiest things that you can do is to create an inventory of your data. And we've actually created a template that the viewers can use to do this in their own office if they don't want to create them one themselves. It has a number of things on it: a name for the data set, a description, the location of where that data is stored, the format that it's stored in, the fields or data points that the data set collects, the collection method. Is it automated? Is it in your EMS, or are you doing it by hand? The date it was first collected, the date it was last updated, and things like the person of contact that they should get in touch with. If you are putting this out publicly, that's very helpful for someone to request a data set, or even someone in your own office that has knowledge about the data set and is looking at it consistently and can answer questions. If you're capturing all of those things and starting by cataloging what data sets you already have in your office, you already have access to, using this inventory is a great way to get started.
Great, thank you. Now that we've talked about, we've brought it from sort of conceptual to some more specific examples about data sources that folks might have or might need to start to gather. It'd be really excellent to see some specific examples. Maybe Whitney, you can kick us off, that folks who are election officials that are doing work today have already done to really put data into practice.
Yeah, I think it's always inspiring when we look into the field of election administration and see sort of the excellent work that's already being done, and so want to make sure that we're highlighting those today. The first one is from Jeremy Gillis, and he is the town clerk in Easton, Massachusetts. And he says that data visualization tends to validate my gut feelings in regards to elections. But unlike intangible feelings, data and their corresponding charts give me evidence as to where, how, and how much I should plan for budget-wise, and also resource allocation on election day. And the visualization that he shared on Twitter, which is what we're looking at now, is really interesting because it's an example of using data as a predictive tool. This is also a great reason to collect data not just as a snapshot, just like one time and you're done, but to collect data as a habit. It's something that you have in place. You have your inventory, checklist, and this is something that you're doing on a regular basis if it's not already automated. So what we're looking at are the voter registration by quarter from 2008 to 2016, and that really high red column is the first quarter of 2016, and so I'm guessing Jeremy is looking at this saying, what is it, there is a storm coming, right? What is going to happen if I'm looking at this now? What should I anticipate for the second 2 quarters of this year? Next example is from Cami Foote. She's the clerk registrar recorder in Inyo County, California. And she says, we hoped that by sharing information via a plain language infographic, accurate data would reach more NPP, which is no political party?
No party preference.
No party preference, thank you. No party preference voters quickly, so they had adequate time to request a ballot with their preferred presidential candidates. And what I really like about this example is it's showing not necessarily numbers, which I think we automatically assume when we're talking about data, we're talking about numbers, but this is actually text. And it's a process, and she displayed this in a way that made it really clear to people who were reading it. Again, people who are in a hurry, who aren't election experts, who might not know what NPP means, a way for them to understand and then act on this information.
Great, so the first example that you showed from the town of Easton in Massachusetts was chronological. It showed changes over time. But this is a different kind of chronology brought to us from Escambia County, Florida. So here's the perspective of David Stafford with regard to using data in his office. He says, we analyze a wide range of data to help us make informed decisions in many different areas of election administration. In fact, he says, we're undertaking 2 new initiatives this election year, a voter survey and a line measurement project to expand our efforts in data collection and analysis. And here's one example of the work that David has done. So this is sort of like what we talked about earlier with making a change. This is data according to the chart pre-cure and post-cure. So the example here is something with regard to missing signatures on domestic absentee ballots. So the survey in the first case here is what the numbers were before the intervention, before they created clear instructions basically to make sure that every voter understood that a signature was required in order for the ballot to be successful. And then the second piece of information is after the cure. And the study shows pretty nicely that both numbers went down. And so it seems like the intervention had a good effect here.
One of the things that I love about this example is by putting this out in the public and being transparent about it, it's an amazing way to be able to get positive attention from the media and from your community about the work that your election office is doing by being able to demonstrate in a really concrete way this cure, this change over time.
That's exactly right. This goes back to what we were saying earlier with how it's important to be transparent, not after the fact, not after someone has called you on something or criticized something or raised a concern, but in front of the fact, right? To show visibly what you're doing and the impact that it's made in your area. Here's another example of data culture created in Orange County, California by Neil Kelly. So Neil says, data in general is important and data in elections is critical. Not only does it tell a story, but it provides valuable information on the entire process, he says, which assists in transparency and maintaining trust in the public. So back to that transparency issue that we've been talking about several times during this talk today. So here's an example of what that looks like to have the data culture in Orange County, California. This is an incredibly rich website that's known as Orange County's Data Central. In effect, it's a dashboard that has several different metrics and several different things that are being measured and shown visually, with regard to elections in Orange County. And we understand, of course, that not everybody has the resources to put something this elaborate together. But Neil's example from Orange County shows just some of the different things that can be done. So if you look at all these 4 different examples, you can see that there's really a lot of diversity with regard to the data cultures that are created and what people are doing with data around the country.
Great.
We have a whole list of other examples that we're going to be putting up on the EAC's website, eac.gov. We do really like to highlight things that election officials are doing across the country because they are inspiring and they do give us places to start if you're looking for new ideas or looking to get inspiration. So that will be up on eac.gov. And I think there's some other places where you can find information too. Is that right?
Yeah, so we encourage everyone to sign up for our monthly newsletter that we put out through the Electricity Network. And that's, again, just spotlighting what we're hearing from the field, what election officials are doing using technology and data to run successful elections. And you can sign up for that at bit.ly/electionbuzz. And then, of course, we launched the Election Toolkit in June. It's a project that we're very proud of. So if you're interested in making infographics or learning how to use Google Analytics, just 2 examples, I would encourage folks to check out electiontools.org.
Great, thanks, Whit. So again, just to review what we've covered in this first workshop of 3, we've started by discussing how you might develop a basis for analyzing data in your election office. We've also talked about how you can acquire starting points for how to use this data to deal with any sort of issue. We've also talked about how you can gain familiarity with data sources and guidelines. And we've also gone through several examples of how election officials are already using data and have already created a data culture in their office. If you have other examples about how you're using data in your office, we really hope that you'll share those with us. You can find us at these different contacts, either beready16@eac.gov, hello@techanciviclife.org, or gov@democracy.org. And again, you also can share those stories using the hashtag #BeReady16, and we'll find them on Twitter and we'll be sure to promote them to the rest of our networks. Thank you.